and you start limiting them. You introduce a few things, workload reduction factor, I'm going to talk about those, A52 and clear zone are nice examples of what has been done. Workload reduction factor, a perfect example of what you can do as a government. Lotus Notes, the at that time most used office environment, email environment, contained workload reduction factor. And what that did is they were allowed to export a 64-bit encryption, but they already gave 24 bits to the government, so that the government only had to crack 40 bits to get the full key and get to the data. A52 is another example where the A5 algorithms are used between your mobile phone and the base station. Well, everybody probably knows that. A51 is the default. It's not that secure anymore. It's being cracked currently in the other tent. But we knew that already. But there was also the A52, and that was the export grade protection of mobile phones. And it's even still in use now. If you go to the Eastern European countries, you only have A52 there. And A52 is a severely crippled form of A51 for protecting your phones, making it easier to, well, eavesdrop on all the calls that are happening there. Another nice example is clear zone. I don't think anybody has heard about clear zone before this. Did anybody? Clear zone is a very nice example. Cisco and a group of other companies decided, well, we have to do something about limiting, but we don't want to do that because then internationally we don't have a nice sales argument. We can only export a 56-bit product. So what we're going to do is we're going to export really good grade cryptography productions, but we're going to include clear zone. What does clear zone do? It doesn't, well, reduce the cryptography, but if you have the right information, a law enforcement agency has that, for instance, you can, before the data gets encrypted, you can get a stream out of it. You can get a loopback interface, and you can get all the data just before it gets encrypted. And that was a really big, well, conglomerate, including Microsoft and the then Netscape and Sun. And this statement and the information about ClearZone is still available on Cisco's site now. And, well, although the export laws have really loosened up in the past years, nobody can tell if it's actually in there or not. There's no more information about that. And the probable reason for reducing those export laws is you want to promote your commercial exportability. You don't want to just be able to deliver degraded products, and the theoretical security of algorithms is already too high. It doesn't really help to, well, to prevent the export of algorithms and to limit key sizes. One of the nice examples of why it doesn't work to to limit exportation of security algorithms is the PGP and RSA part, where somebody wrote a book containing the entire algorithm, because you could export a book containing an algorithm and somebody else just typed it in already, and, well, you suddenly have an exported version of the algorithm. So cryptography is not helping anymore, at least not from an intelligence side of view. But there are lots of other, well, ways to go. Emissions is the second largest source of information. And the government started already really early. In 1954, during the Cold War, the Russians and the Soviets were really busy with each other. And suddenly, the Americans noticed that the Soviets had, well, gotten a new procedure that all communications equipment had to be very, very shielded for interfering with other products. But they only did that for their communications equipment. They didn't do anything with their imported machinery, their cars, anything. It was only for communication equipment and teletypewriters that contained secrets. And the NSA was, why? Well, we don't know. And they didn't really do anything about it, and they didn't really get it at that moment. And then suddenly, 10 years later, they found 40 hidden microphones in their embassy in Moscow. It was built into the walls, and they found the 40 microphones, and they found tiny, tiny other devices with microphones attached that they didn't really understand. And above their communications area, they had a specific area where their communication equipment was, there was some kind of large metal mesh specifically made into the concrete of the ceiling. So there was a strange mesh there, and there was a wire leading out that went to the outer wall. Nobody really understood, and then they started investigating, and they already knew something about this field, and they made a really nice paper about it, and they just recently released it. And as you can see, a lot of information is not yet public, but they really made a really nice paper about it. And the field is, well, now known as Tempest. And Tempest is not an abbreviation, at least nobody has an official abbreviation for it, but the one I like most is tiny electromagnetic particles that emit secrets. And you see that although the government was already busy with protecting secrets from radiation in 1954, when the Soviets were busy with that, but the only first public reference is from 30 years later, when Wim van Eck, a Dutch guy, working at the telecom operator at that time, published a paper about using electromagnetic information to view monitors through a wall. That was a really new thing at that time in the public world, but governments were doing it way earlier. And from that time on, there isn't much show of new research in that area. There's not much new things going on. And then suddenly in the last 10 years, you see the public in the research in the universities doing, well, something in that area as well. The most notable for the last 10 years are papers about eavesdropping on monitors, both CRT and TFT, from a distance by using electromagnetic information. But also a different kind of Tempest, namely listening to a keyboard using microphones from a distance, and then as every tone every key has a different tone when you listen from it from a distance, you can use that sound information, it's also radiation, to gather the information about what somebody's typing. And then just recently, 2 weeks ago I think, it was published in Black Hat, using lasers shown at the back of a screen to gather the emissions of the keyboard and to read out the information somebody's typing, or using a power socket 15 meters away where the same is achieved. And what you see here is that researchers in the last 10 years have published things that they think are really, really cool. But the government knew that already way back 50 years before, when they were already busy snooping in embassies and in other environments probably to get information from teletypewriters. Because what was the thing in the ceiling? It was just a big antenna. And using big antennas can give you a lot of radiation from the equipment that's standing beneath it. So, as I already stated, you see there's a large gap between what happens in the research world and what happens in the government level. You already saw that with the cryptographic level. There's a big difference between when the cryptography information gets in the public sector and when it's invented in the government sector, if they're really interested in it. So, well, emissions, you can do something about that. But there are other areas you can use to get information, because Tempest is nice, but it also has some drawbacks. You have to be physically present to get the information. I mean, you need some kind of microphone and dishes, and you have to get something. You probably can make it that you can be far away, but there's some physical boundaries you have to overcome. And we already established that brute force